Fantastic villains are something we don't get a great deal of in the Marvel movies. We have some, sure, but for every Loki we get a Malekith, a Yellow Jacket, a Rohan, and an Ultron. He was a poor man's Loki, we need to admit it. And note that I say and not or there. It's literally like 4 bad movie villains to every one good movie villain. So it's great that despite all this, we get Thanos standing on high as possibly the greatest Marvel movies villain within the cinematic universe. Though who am I kidding? We all know who the greatest villain of the MUC was. William Dafoe. Thanos has been a slow, poor, enigmatic villain that manipulated events from the shadows and carefully moved into the position of being the protagonist of his own movie. A movie where he suffered hardship, faced change, made strides, made sacrifices, and ultimately achieved his goal at the end of the movie. Hell, it's great just to have a villain protagonist in a world where most movies are so formulaic that it's nearly impossible to have a summer blockbuster release that doesn't have a happy ending for the heroes unless it's prepping for a sequel. And when Thanos finally gets his ass off that chair, he's great, pushing his way into the ends of other movies, wiping out most of the survivors, beating the crap out of the Hulk, and temporarily killing the current champion of best Marvel movie villain in order to take his place. It's definitely temporary, it's Loki for crying out loud. Overall, Thanos is a pretty solid villain, except maybe for his primary motivation. That's pretty dumb. And I'm not saying it's dumb on the simple fact that he wants to murder half the universe. That would be too easy. Simply classing mass murder as evil isn't what I'm going for here, because we know Thanos makes it a bit more complicated than that. He isn't just out for murder, he's out to balance the universe. By wiping out half of its population, he believes that he will leave the remaining half of the universe in better circumstances. The remaining half will have less need to squabble over resources. They'll be able to spread out and prosper. Overpopulation will cease to be a thing. Everything will be perfectly balanced. Yeah, let's look at why that's just wrong. Oh, and spoilers for Infinity War, by the way. If you've gotten this far into the video, though, I don't even know why I'm bothering. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Infinity Gauntlet comic, but nothing too spoilery, though. Maybe 1 or 2 bits, but... The first big problem here is how Thanos wipes out half the universe. He makes a point about it being fair and equal. Everyone has a chance of being wiped out. It's pretty much 50-50, with the only real exception being meta, and just how important a character is to the sequel of the movie being if that character gets to stick around. I see you surviving, Nebula. I read the comics. Now, we don't get to see the mechanics for how the Gauntlet does this. We just see it turning a whole bunch of people into ash. But we see that it does seem to follow Thanos' stated aims from earlier. It's random, and takes people regardless of their power and status. The fact that it takes Nick Fury, possibly one of the most important and powerful people on Earth, and Black Panther, the king of a nation, alongside characters like Drax and Groot from a small group of galactic bounty hunters. It's all a clear sign of this. It's clear it's random. The problem with this? That occurs when you upscale said randomness to the quadrillions or quintillions and beyond that make up an entire universe. It doesn't seem like the Gauntlet will be going through an orderly database of the universe's population. It's just going to be eating up half of the universe. Yomp chop. That means clumps of people are going to get taken all at once. It's not a case of a family of 10 people is going to end up with 5 people left, because when those 10 people are part of a larger group, you could end up with 8 of them gone, or none of them gone, or all but one. We could end up with a situation with 2 planets, where one planet's population is entirely wiped out, and the other planet's population remains as it is. If the planet that's left isn't advanced enough for its inhabitants to travel into space, Thanos' aims to balance the population doesn't exactly work. We see this happen in the Infinity Gauntlet comic book storyline. Thanos wipes out half the population of the universe. In this case, he did it less because of perfect balance and more because he was trying to woo the personification of death. He was depicted as a nihilist in this one. It made a bit more sense. And one of the results of this is the islands of Japan just disappearing. All of Japan gets wiped out. They can't exactly balance their country's resources if there's no one left to balance them. Now, you could argue that the rest of the planet could use Japan's resources, but that's not really the point here. The point is we are left uncertain as to how much of the planet's population is left. If a non-spacefaring planet isn't left at exactly 50% of its population, then Thanos' plan kind of hasn't worked. That remaining 50% could possibly prosper faster and travel to planets that were wiped out to use their resources as a result of that finger snap, but that by itself is an idealistic view of the situation. It's simply not as cut and dry as Thanos makes it appear to be. And this is all an extreme result of the problem. There's going to be plenty of locations out there where variations of this situation are going to cause its population to suffer as a result of this culling, simply because of who gets taken and who gets left behind. Imagine the planets where the majority of people left behind are only one of the unnecessary agendas. When you randomly cull like this, you're going to be left with planets that suffer unequally like this. You could end up with a planet where only the oldest generations are left. You would probably still get people in the younger generation surviving, but if they end up few and far between, you're going to end up with problems in the long term. Imagine if the majority of the doctors and nurses of a planet are taken out by chance. There's simply no way to make this fair and balanced without some extra cost possibly dooming entire races of those who survived. Some planets may recover in the long run, but there's going to be a fair share who are simply unable to continue after this happens. Then we have the issue of just how effective Thanos' plan will be long term. Let's ignore what I've just said and say his plan goes through as he envisions it. How long before the universe simply cancels out his actions long term? In population statistics, there's a concept known as the doubling rate. This is pretty much what it sounds like. It's how long a stretch of time before a population doubles itself. If you have a hive of 100 bees and 7 years later you have 200 bees, you have a doubling rate of 7 years. Something like this alone can invalidate Thanos' entire plan in the long term unless he plans on wiping out half the universe again every 10 years or so. And it's not even that inconceivable for population rates to grow like this. Between 1927 and 1975, it took just under 50 years for the total population of humans on Earth to double from 2 billion to 4 billion. And as of 2019 here, we're currently on 7.5 billion. If it takes us roughly 50 years to double up each time, the universe is going to catch itself back up pretty quickly. And that's assuming all conditions remain stable. Thanos has just gifted the universe's remaining inhabitants with double the amount of resources they were currently using. Population growth is tied to the economy and infrastructure of its nations. These remaining people are going to survive and prosper and, well, grow, probably at a faster rate than they did before. If the Earth went back down to 3.75 billion, we'd probably find ourselves back up to 7.5 billion in about 30 to 40 years instead of the previous 50. So Thanos' plan doesn't work there either. Of course, one could argue that the people will see the result of Thanos' plan and maybe change their ways, use these resources correctly, grow slowly, maintain their populations, just out of fear of another culling, if anything. The problem with this is that barely anyone knows why this has all happened. There are people on Earth who do, and they may spread the news, and there'll be a few galactic governing bodies that might have an idea based on intel they've picked up about Thanos, if they survive the finger snap. But there are going to be planets out there who are going to assume that incomprehensible gods decided to rain vengeance down on them and wipe out the unworthy, and they're probably never going to get told otherwise. The universe is a big place after all, and this news isn't going to trickle down accurately to everyone out there. How many planets are going to tear themselves apart in mass panics? How long until the remaining inhabitants succumb to survivor's guilt and give up on life? Annoyingly, there are going to be a few planets out there that go Walking Dead stupid on themselves and set up totalitarian dictatorship fiefdoms all over the place and ruin life for all the survivors. If Thanos wants his perfectly balanced plan to work, he's really going to need to educate everyone on what to do next rather than leave them to their own devices. But nope, he's taking a rest now. So, how can Thanos do better? I'm sure no one would mind me making suggestions for how he could improve his removal of half the universe better, whether he needs to take off more or less. Yeah, we'll be fine with that. Well, let's look at his goal. Thanos' aims are at least attempting a pragmatic, sustainable approach at handling the limited resources of the universe and the populations that use them. But it's a pretty heavy-fisted method of doing it. Now, the most obvious way he could have handled this better is, rather than eliminating half of all life, would be to simply double the amount of resources. Either make it so that each planet can generate double the amount of total resources it needs, or simply create a duplicate of every inhabited planet and move half its population across. I'm sure the Infinity Gauntlet could make such a positioning situation reasonable. Each new planet can be on the exact opposite side of the original's orbit, so there's no risk of a collision or major change in the environment. Maybe he could set up a scheme that would allow the inhabitants to travel between their worlds so they could settle in better. While we're talking about infinite power of the Gauntlet, this all really isn't an issue, and it's kind of on the same simplistic level as reducing half the population of the universe, even if it is sounding a little silly. Except it still is kind of an issue because we come back to the same problem of the doubling rate. If you have a population of X and split that population between two planets, so X divided by 2, it's not going to be too long before those two new populations double themselves back up to the original X value. Once again, you're back to where you started. So how about we go overboard? Each single populated planet gets 3 more planets, 4 in total, each essentially at the quarter point of the original's orbit, so each planet now basically gets 4 times the resources. Well, then you're just delaying the inevitable, and not for very long either. Let's say the doubling rate of a planet in this situation is 40 years. Then it's only 80 years before each planet is full again, because we go from 25% to 50% in the first, and then 50% to 100% in the second doubling rate. If anything, we're setting up conditions that allow the universe's population to increase even faster, since we're creating new environments with the exact conditions a planet's inhabitants need to grow. We're getting into a bit of a quandary here, because really both these extremes show the difficulty in Thanos' aims. There's really no long-term solution to his problem that doesn't go too far one way or another. If you wipe out populations, then those populations will just grow back, possibly even faster than before. But even if it's slower than before, they'll still just grow back. And providing more resources to the populations will just encourage those populations to grow at a faster rate. We have to look at this another way, and really, the solution's kind of obvious. Especially when we have an infinity gauntlet that allows us to do whatever we want. We can essentially stop and start whatever systems are in the way. So let's stop the concepts of growth and decline altogether. Nothing's really beyond us. Step 1. Wipe out half the population of the universe as before. That helps reduce the total workload easily. Step 2 would be to sterilize the entire universe. That way, no more life can then be created, so no more future growth. Half the problem sorted. Step 3 would then be make all life immortal. Now, no more life can be destroyed. With life and death now made meaningless to the remaining inhabitants of the universe, they can continue in Thanos' perfect balance. Resource consumption will still be a long-term issue, though a hell of a lot longer now, but that's okay. With limited numbers and infinite time, until the heat death of the universe, I suppose, we'll no doubt find ways to improve our collection and use of resources. And hell, we could always make more resource-filled planets if that became necessary. We have the gauntlet after all. Step 4, important, using the mind gem to tell everyone in the universe what just happened. That immediately stops a lot of the uncertainty out there and people possibly trying to murder their own immortal bodies and whatnot. Thinking about it, we could actually eliminate heat death while we're at it. We have the time gem. Simply set the universe up to loop perfectly on itself so total entropy is never fully reached. It's cool. We have the Infinity Gauntlet. Everything is cool when you have the Infinity Gauntlet. Everything. Well, it's not. Not at all, really, but it would at least be a little more effective than Thanos' short-sighted plan. Yeah, I admit this is kind of a tough problem to tackle, universal resource sustainability. That's essentially what Thanos is doing, to use management speak. It's not a clean, easy issue, and extremes like this never really work themselves anyway, so, well, yeah. We kind of fizzle out here, I'm afraid, because there's no clean, easy solution, which isn't probably horrifying in some way. In an odd way, the better answer is to just kind of keep plodding along to some weird extent. So yeah, Endgame will be coming out soon, and I hope the consequences of Thanos' actions are addressed decently somehow. I really hope we don't get something stupid like after the initial panic, most planets did prosper for Thanos' plans, as if his plan could really work. But the heroes still have to fight him anyway because he's just evil for what he's done, and they want Spider-Man back. But the Russos usually do give us pretty satisfactory endings to situations with complicated dilemma arguments like this, so I'm hoping that Endgame covers a lot of why Thanos' plan doesn't work, rather than just a we want to bring back those who got dusted type situation. I guess we'll see. So, what are your feelings on Thanos' methods? Do you feel that they don't quite work, or do you feel that they actually do kind of make sense, and they're the best of a bad situation? Let me know in the comments below, and hey, if you like my videos, maybe click subscribe, maybe click a like, maybe click the bell icon, maybe click other things they've put in there in an attempt to make things click and keep a reasonable algorithmic feed of what's going on. I don't entirely know how all this works, just, maybe look at some more of my videos. They might be good for you. Thanks again. See you next time.